is, man. We ain't about to panic. Ain't no need to be nervous. It's a fight. It's a 7-point ball game, and we get the ball first. It's a fight. Go out there and fight.
Gives it to Love, running left, tripped up, stays on his feet through one tackle, muscling and strong. Oh, he scored! He's in! Oh my gosh! Touchdown, Notre Dame! Jeremiah Love would not be denied. Aller throws, loose ball, intercepted! Christian Gray picks it off. Notre Dame will get the ball back.
Irish Nation, welcome to the final episode of season 5 of Irish Talk. Mike and I have now gotten on the other side of digesting the college football playoff snub, the holidays, the actual college football playoff games, and I'm really glad we've waited to reflect on the season of 2025 and look ahead to next year, Mike, with the passing of time. We were just talking before the show. We haven't seen each other here on Zoom in 7-8 weeks now since early December, but truly as the calendar turns to 2026 and a lot of momentum back around the program going into next year, I think we're finally at a place as a fan base where we can look back critically on the season of 2025 and assess very black and white and feel really good about where Marcus Freeman is and the state of the program. But maybe before we dive into season grades, how are you feeling after about a month and a half break here from Irish Talk? Last time we talked was truly like the day we got snubbed. How have your feelings and take here evolved as you're wearing your Catholics versus Committee shirt on our episode?
Let me get that in the camera so people can see.
Yeah.
Shout out to Kate for Cubbies on Twitter. She was the one who spearheaded this t-shirt campaign. Fun t-shirt to have. My brother, who likes to DJ in the local house music scene in Austin, he actually wore this t-shirt at a set. So trying to get the Lord's word out here. But this is a t-shirt. This is a t-shirt I'm going to keep coming back to. This is a that snub is something I don't think I will ever actually get over. But we are here to look ahead and not focus on that as much.
So especially with the theme of looking ahead to 2026, we've mixed up our season grading a little bit. The grades are the same. The format of the show is going to be a little different. We're going to go through the offense and defense overall, along with each position group. And in the past, we've done a season grade, and then separately, we've done a show looking ahead to next year. We're going to combine those. Mike's going to cover the grades. I'm then going to immediately, as we talk about each position group, look ahead to what's coming back next year and whether or not we should feel the same, better, or worse about the position group. And as a reminder for our grading system, we will use analytical stats to the best we can. We will supplement with Pro Football Focus grades that, again, are a little art and science, data-driven and qualitative, to hand out the grades in a numerical way. If it is a top 25 performance, you are in the A range. Top 50 performance, you're in the B range. Top 75, C. Top 100, D. And if you're outside the top 100, F. And then within that, obviously, closer at the higher end, we'll add pluses. Lower end, we'll add minuses. And Mike and I, this is subjective like any professor, reserve the right to move units up or down, pending on the context of their performance, even outside just the numbers. We make up the rules as we go here on Irish Talk, but at least claim that they're data-based. So, Mike, let's start overall for the entire team. Where do you have the team here in 2025 grading out?
Just to set a stake in the ground in terms of how we did from an advanced metric standpoint, because that's what we leaned very heavily into. We were number 6 in SP Plus. That's one of the higher rankings a Notre team has had that I can recall. We finished obviously number 11 in the college football playoff, which is disappointing. Number 10 in the AP poll. I have to note that while SP Plus, which is the advanced metric that we lean on very heavily, has at 6, there were other advanced metrics systems that had us higher. And in fact, a lot of the Vegas betting models had us pretty much neck and neck with IU before that committee snub. So this was a team that certainly there was a lot of data out here that was saying that we were one of the top teams in the country, certainly a title contender. So I think that is very important. That's a very important. It's very important context to keep in mind when you give this overall ranking. So for me, look, I think this was certainly a team that had the potential for an A++. This was a team that had the potential to actually win a title, but we didn't get that opportunity, and we didn't get that opportunity because we slipped up in those first two games. And look, it's nothing to sneeze at, right? It's nothing to be ashamed of. We lost by a handful of points to two top teams in the country, one of which played in the national title. And look, Miami, as the playoff went on, they looked better and better. I think they were clearly the number 2 team in the country. So certainly nothing to be ashamed of. But we didn't get an opportunity because we put ourselves in a position to where we were at risk of being snubbed. So I can't give us an A+, but I think by virtue of the fact that we had a team that was capable of contending for a title, that was playing at a very high level, especially at the end of the year, to me, that's worthy of an A grade. And I think, look, this is just something that we haven't been used to. In the past 15 years, we've had teams that have played at high levels, but we haven't had a team play at a high level and actually truly be operating at the point to where they could take down enough top teams to actually win a title.
Yeah, and for context on just how incredible that is that Notre Dame is number 6 in SP+, and I think just as importantly, really in striking distance, about a touchdown or so, maybe even less than that, 5-6 points behind Indiana and Ohio State. This is the 3rd consecutive season that Marcus Freeman here has had a team in the top 10. We've now finished number 6, number 8, number 8 in SP+. Number 6 is the highest we've been since 1995, except for the 2020 season when we finished number 5. But as we saw at the end of the year, we might have been number 5 in SP+, but there was a big gap between us and Alabama. There was a big gap between us and the ACC champ Clemson in that ACC title game. And so, yes, that was a great team. Yes, they made a 4-team college football playoff field, but they didn't actually on the field demonstrate they could go toe-to-toe with the upper echelon of the sport in the way that Freeman has now done 2 consecutive years against that Miami and A&M game, against Ohio State multiple times over the last several years, beating Indiana, beating Penn State, beating Georgia, like clearly in the upper echelon of the sport. Great place for this program to be. I agree with the A grade. No dispute whatsoever. Let's move to the offense. I'm going to save my holistic outlook for expectations on the team until we get through the look-ahead preview for the unit. So we'll come back to that at the end. Let's keep going on the grades, Mike. Let's start with the offense as a whole before we dive into position groups. Where did you have the offensive side of the ball grading out?
Again, we'll use SP Plus here as the anchor, as the starting point. They graded out as number 4 in SP Plus. So that is an A+. Number 10th in success rate. That's one of the pillars, one of the statistical pillars of SP Plus. That's just, if you can stay on schedule consistently, you're going to tend to have an extremely effective offense. And then on top of that, very explosive. 3rd in explosiveness. Our run game was obviously extremely explosive with Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. And then we had a vertical passing game with CJ Carr. So that's a perfect recipe for driving a ton of explosiveness. In fact, on the passing element of that explosiveness in particular, we ranked 2nd in success rate on passing downs. So very, very effective. And the havoc that we allowed was fairly limited as well. So this was an offense that was among the top in the country. And I think they were getting better and better as the year went on, particularly as Carr got more and more reps. He had a couple games here and there where maybe he wasn't operating at the top of his game, but overall this was a young quarterback with a lot of talent who kept getting better and better. So for me, it's an A+. I think it's one of the most exciting offenses I've watched as a fan for many reasons. I mentioned the passing. I mentioned the run game. It really felt like every single game, Jeremiah Love or Jadarian Price would just have some sort of highlight SportsCenter top 10 type play. And then you match that with an elite quarterback who is getting discussed as a potential 1st-round pick. Look, it just doesn't get a whole lot better than that. So if that's not an A+, I don't know what is. So to answer your question, it's I think clearly worthy of an A+ grade here.
Totally agree. And I went back to the notes from last year. We actually finished number 4 in SP Plus on offense last year as well, and actually knocked it down to an A because we had an Achilles heel. You mentioned that vertical passing game. We just didn't have that balanced attack. Hyper efficient, great running offense, especially with Riley Leonard and his dynamic legs, complementing Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. But it wasn't as balanced, and that became an Achilles heel in different spots of the season, including in the national title game. But top 5 SP Plus back-to-back years, the best really outside of the Jimmy Clausen 2009 season, which was then paired with just an abysmal defense. You've really got to go back again to the early 90s, all the way back in 1993, last time that Notre Dame was top 5 back-to-back seasons. 91, 92, 93 is actually 3 consecutive years in the top 5. So just historically for Notre Dame, the offense clicking on all cylinders. All right, Mike, let's dive into the grades here for each of the position groups, starting with the all-important quarterback position. What do you got for us?
So we graded out really well. So 9th in Pro Football Focus grade. So top 10, which is an exceptional place to be. CJ Carr actually ranked 14th. It's worth noting here that Minchie graded out extremely well when he got in, so that helped boost our rating. But I'm gonna lead on CJ Carr's Pro Football Focus grades here, because I think that's more of the true ranking of where our passing attack actually is. For context, Riley Leonard was 24th. He obviously improved a lot as a passer as the season went on. Very limited early on, but certainly didn't give us the vertical passing game that CJ Carr did. And then Jack Cohn, who was also a solid quarterback, nothing spectacular, but a solid quarterback. He was 37th. This is the first time we've had a top 20 Pro Football Focus grade quarterback since the grading started in 2014. So this was certainly an upgrade at the quarterback position, noticeably so. And Carr pretty much, again, as I mentioned before, he had a couple freshman. He's not a freshman, but like a couple first year starter moments. But overall, a fantastic first year as the starter. He only had 6 interceptions, didn't turn the ball over much, didn't take many sacks, just 8 sacks all year, 10.5% pressure to sack rate, very low, top 20 in the country. And then, as we mentioned with the vertical passing game, average depth of target is something that Brett and I mentioned consistently. It tells you basically how far the quarterback is throwing on his passing attempts. And the further they throw, the more yardage that they tend to get when they complete the ball. And so Carr he was the 3rd highest among top 25 QBs. He had a very strong completion percentage, but when he was completing the ball, he was also tending to get big chunk plays, which is exactly what you want to see. And this is what you need for an explosive offense. So for me, you put that all together. I mean, I'll rattle off some just headline stats for Carr just to give even more context. 2,741 passing yards, 66.6% completion percentage. If you adjust it for drops and things like that, it's 73%. That's great. And as I mentioned, when you're accounting for his average depth of target, that's an even more spectacular number. And then he also, threw for 24 touchdowns. So this was just a pretty much best case scenario for us. I know coming into this year, we knew Carr had a lot of potential, and I think he pretty much checked every single box. There's a reason he was being talked about as a potential first round pick, and now he's, as Brett, you're going to be getting into when you talk about our
don't steal the thunder.
I'm not going to steal the thunder, but he has. I'll just say he has right now per Vegas. He has very good odds as a Heisman candidate. And I'll just leave it at that, and I'll let you get more into the specifics. So for me, look, I think this is an A. I think because we got off to a little bit of a slow start at the position, a lot of that was just because he had some training wheels on. He had a couple first-year starter moments, but he flashed immense potential, and overall, over the entirety of the season, he played exceptionally well. I think for this season, it's an A. I'll let you get into expectations moving forward, but for me, I'll just say that my expectations moving forward are even higher than the A grade that I gave for the 2025 season.
Yeah, the expectation for next year is for sure A+. You mentioned it. He is tied with Arch Manning for the preseason favorite for the Heisman next year. at plus 750, depending where you look. Some other sites are at plus 800. If you translate that, that gives him about a 12% chance to win the Heisman. So this isn't like he's a slam dunk, expects to win it, more often than not. Obviously way too early for that, but it's an indicator that everyone out there expects CJ Carr to be one of the elite premier QBs in the country, going into really what'll be his third year, his last one if he wants to go to the NFL, the last required year here in college. And the reason for that optimism, second year in an offense. You mentioned the training wheels, but everyone expects that second year starter to not have those early jitters, will know the whole playbook, has now 12 real games of reading defenses, of getting through progressions, of seeing different looks. You just expect that quarterback to make a jump. Now, there's one thing I want to caveat. The depth of this QB room is probably at its lowest in the last 5+ years. We've always had like a Brandon Wimbush, Ian Book. We've always had, even like a Drew Pine or Tyler Buckner backing up, like Jack Cohn, or like there's always been another talented guy in the room that wasn't a true freshman. And that's the hard part about the portal era, where Kenny Minchey now enters the portal, is going to be the starter, or is it the expected starter at Kentucky in the SEC? And behind CJ Carr is a pretty thin room. Teddy Gerard looks like he's going to reclassify and come in as a 4-star freshman recruit. Noah Grubbs expected to come in as a 4-star freshman recruit. So it's not that there's not talent there, but it's going to be really, really thin at the QB position. And so the concern there is obviously if something happens to CJ Carr, but that also says Mike Denbrock has to be really conservative in protecting CJ Carr. Like any semblance of a run game that we had with Carr this year, which wasn't much, but may need more from his legs because you don't have Jeremiah Love, because you don't have Jadarian Price. I wonder if we wind up seeing a more limited playbook than we otherwise would have by nature of knowing, hey, you don't have a backup behind him. Gosh, that's nitpicking when you got the preseason Heisman favorite. And my last part on this, reminder, he split first-team reps last summer with Kenny Minchey. And I think that played a role into the slow start, the limited playbook, the shorter passing throws we saw against Miami and to an extent Texas A&M game. I think now going in as the guy, the leader in the locker room, almost certainly going to be a captain, getting all of the reps, like that moxie that comes with that, and the reps and experience, all bodes really well that this could be a special campaign for CJ Carr.
Yeah, look.
All right, Mike. Oh, sorry, keep going.
I'll make one final comment. I think if we were to adjust this grade for the 2025 season, say it was an experience adjusted grade, then I think it would be like an A. It would be like an A++. It's like this is about as good as you could have hoped for a first-time starter. So that'll just be my final point on CJ Carr. Now, moving to running back, this is a position group that if this doesn't get an A+, then I don't know what the heck would be worthy of an A+. So I'll just say that up front. When you have a room with Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, look, that's a very, very special room. This will probably be the best running back room that we'll ever see. It's hard to imagine just having that 1-2 combo. It's hard to imagine having something like that again in the future. So in terms of where they stacked up in terms of Pro Football Focus grade, they were 7th. We were 8th in rushing explosiveness. This was a very explosive run game. As I mentioned before, it felt like every game there was some sort of highlight reel play where Jadarian Price would or Jeremiah Love would make a crazy spin move and then run like 50 yards. They were just generating big plays constantly. 25th in rushing down success rate. And then look, Jeremiah Love was a Heisman Trophy finalist. And I think if he hadn't gotten injured in that last game of the season and he had had a banner day, had put up some really impressive stats, I'm not saying that he would have won the Heisman Trophy, but I think there was an actual path for him to maybe get even more into that conversation and have a bit of a shot. Because the conversation about him being a true Heisman candidate was picking up in those last couple weeks, because at that point, there wasn't a quarterback who had totally emerged. Obviously, Mendoza is very worthy and showed himself to be so. But if we rewind to that last game of the season, it wasn't so clear at that point. Getting more into these rushing stats. So Jeremiah Love averaged 6.9 yards per attempt. Incredible number in terms of how he actually graded out in Pro Football Focus grade. It was a 93, which is one of the highest grades that you can get. He's a first round pick. He might go as early as top 5 overall in the NFL draft, which is extremely remarkable for running back. Jadarian Price, he averaged 6 yards per attempt, and he's someone who will go in one of the early rounds as well. So look, this is just a incredibly efficient, incredibly explosive running back room, and it's going to be a lot to replace. These guys were opposing defenses. The fact that we had such an effective running game, it was a nightmare for opposing defenses to try to plan against that. And even when you loaded the box, these guys would still tend to rip off some big runs here and there. So for me, just tying it all back, like I said, A+. This was I'll go even one step further. This was, I think, unequivocally the best running back room in the entire country. To me, I don't even think that there's a close second.
1000% agree. And 100% of that production will not return next year. So for sure, this is the group that will take the biggest step back last year to this year. I'm going to make a bold take. I think we're still going to be talking about a top 25 running back room next year. I know that's bold. I'll call it an A-. Maybe it's B+. But when you ask whether or not you can really replace Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price, of course the answer is not fully. But since 2014, only one starting running back at Notre Dame has not made it to the NFL as a starting running back in at least one game in the NFL. And that's Terry and Folston. And when you think about how those guys did, there was never a gap year. It's not like a guy made it to the NFL and then the next year, the next guy kind of struggled and eventually found his game. Like CJ Prosise was replaced by Josh Adams, 33 trucking All-American caliber season. He was replaced by Sexy Dexy Dexter Williams. He was replaced by Tony Jones Jr. He was replaced by Kyron Williams. He was replaced by Audric Estime. He was replaced by Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. Like, we have rattled off NFL caliber running backs. And so this room now has Aeneas Williams as the expected starter next year, presumptive number 1. And he didn't play a lot in 2025, but he got a lot more playing time in 2024 under the prior running back coach that was more of a by committee approach. Everyone remembers he was the third down back and played critical moments in the Penn State game that got us to a national championship, or at least into the title game. And so Aeneas Williams here coming back is, I'm not saying a proven commodity, but has film and reps on tape that says, hey, this guy's legit. He's productive when he's gotten his looks. And he's not just been like productive in mop-up time. He's been productive when Jeremiah Love's banged up and he's splitting reps with Jadarian Price. And we have a semifinal playoff game on the line, and he performed at a high level. And then around that, just a ton of high caliber talent. You've got a guy like Kedron Young, who I kind of think is built like a Audric Estime or a Tony Jones Jr., really, really big frame. He was a beast in summer camp, actually was vying to be the short yardage back, looked like he was going to win that role, and then went down with a season-ending injury, but could easily be a very solid number 2 complement. And then don't forget a couple of really highly talented, top 100, top 150 caliber recruits in the building, and Nolan James, I believe a redshirt freshman, and then Javian Osborne coming in as a true freshman. And I think running back, outside of the pass scheme, like outside of pass blocking, running back's a little easy to plug and play in terms of productivity. You say guys like a Jeremiah Love be productive early on in their careers. Could see that happening for a couple of those guys. So it's a loaded room. Sky's the limit on potential. Certainly not going to be Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. So I'm going to go ahead and knock them back to an A minus, maybe B plus, but still expect a very solid running back room going into next year.
It's exactly where I'm at. I think I have expectations that this should be a really good running back room, but it's not going to be the generational running back room that we had this past year. Nothing will. And so it could still be really effective, really productive, but we don't have Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price as a 1-2 punch. Now, moving on to wide receiver, tight end. Going into the season, I believe our prediction was that this had the potential to be a good wide receiver room, potentially a top 25 wide receiver room. And we did caveat it with, saying that, yeah, we've heard this before, maybe this will be the year where we actually have a more effective production from the receiving core. And I would say by and large we did. I think this was around a top 25 unit. Interestingly, Pro Football Focus graded them 6. That felt a little generous to me, honestly. When I just look at our crop of receivers, a lot of good players, but no one absolutely spectacular. So Faison and Fields, they graded out around top 100. They both had a little over 600 yards. Faison had 4 touchdowns, Fields 5 touchdowns. So look, very productive. But then after that, there's a bit of a drop off. So again, there's no clear star here. And I think for a wide receiver room to elevate from that, that good top 25 tier to truly more of a very good or elite category, you need that receiver that strikes fear into someone. And I wouldn't say that we had that this year. Fields certainly had some moments later in the season. And I think that is one other point that I'll make here is that as the season went on, this room did improve. And so maybe by the end of the year, they were maybe operating closer to a top 15 level. And unfortunately, we didn't get an opportunity to see how they played in the playoffs. It's possible if we got into the playoff and they had a couple performances like Greathouse had against Penn State, maybe we would have marked them up a little bit. But I think for me, the takeaway is this was a good wide receiver group that was capable of taking advantage of a very talented quarterback. And that's exactly what happened. I think a few other things to call out here, just this was a very clean group, only 10 drops all year. They performed very well in run blocking. So I think this is what we had hoped for, and it's what we it's what we hoped for, and it's what we got. And I think as you'll get into, Brett, I think it just feels like every year with this wide receiver position group, I think we have hopes for potential and for a group that performs well, but it's a little bit uncertain, and that was the case going in to this season. And we happen to get a good result, and hopefully we'll get the same next season. And then I'll kick it over to you to talk about that latter point more.
Yeah, this is one where I certainly feel like Pro Football Focus, it's subjective, and there are other positions that I think are more grounded in stats. Receivers, the yards can be misleading if you're just passing the ball a lot. The yards can be deceiving if you got a really great quarterback like CJ Carr, but I agree this was a solid group around top 25. I'd maybe go A minus, B plus. And we sneaky lose a lot here. So Malachi Fields, Eli Raridan, Will Pauling, Jeremiah Love, KK Smith, and Jadarian Price are all gone. Those were our 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 8th contributors in terms of yards in the passing game this year. 6 of the top 8. They were 1st, 2nd, 4th, 5th, and 5th, tied for 5th in touchdown catches. Like, we're losing a lot of talent. Now, the reason for optimism, the number one guy, Jordan Faison, is back next year. The number one guy from the previous year, Jaden Greathouse, was clearly banged up all year and then wound up just deciding to take a medical red shirt. Would have been cleared to play in the college football playoff, but decided to preserve that eligibility. He's kind of the great enigma. A very up and down year in 2024, breaks out in the college football playoff, looks like a bona fide star in the making. And whether it was injuries or just not meeting that potential, wasn't the guy this year. But you've got Faison, number one guy from last year back. Greathouse, number one guy from 2 years ago back. And then Micah Gilbert certainly flashed at moments this year. You still have Cam Williams and Elijah Burris. In the depth chart, all guys that are elite recruits. Cam Williams is a fringe 5-star. And then, as we talked about on the transfer portal show, Quincy Porter and Mylan Graham, 2 backups at Ohio State, but 5-star recruiting pedigree coming over from the Buckeyes. And so this feels like in the past we've said, hey, the room should be more stable because we now have a guy like Bo Collins. The room should be more stable because we have a guy like Malachi Fields. The room should be more stable because we have a guy like Will Pauling. Now it's the room should be more stable because of proven guys at Notre Dame. Not were they doing it at Virginia, were they doing it at Clemson, were they doing it at Wisconsin. But Faison and Greathouse have done it at Notre Dame. That should really solidify the floor for this group. And then I think it's as talented from just like a pure raw athletic recruiting perspective that we've seen with Porter, Graham, Gilbert, Burris, and Cam Williams. This isn't saying, hey, could some of those, top 200, top 300 recruits pan out? This is saying, are 5 stars and top 100 4-stars going to materialize? And we have 5 of them, not named Jordan Faison and Jaden Greathouse. So it's still hard to know. Like, truly, I think going into next year, wide receiver might actually be the weakest position group on the offense. I think it's probably wide receiver or running back. But I just like Ainias Williams, and I like Notre Dame's track record of producing running backs, that there's a little bit at wide receiver that you got to see it before we believe it. I still maintain Notre Dame has 2 high school wide receiver recruits currently on NFL rosters, and they're Cam Hart and Xavier Watts. Neither play offense. And so, to me, there's a little bit, Notre Dame's got to prove it in the wide receiver room. So I'm not ready to elevate this into the A range next year. I've got it at a B+, but it's the one that if I had to just bet my heart, bet my gut, which position group do I think has the biggest potential to go from B+ to A+? It's the wide receiver room with all of the talent in the world and a Heisman caliber quarterback throwing them the football. So ton of reason for upside. I just think it's the biggest question mark we have to be talking about yet again. Feels like the 4th, 5th year in a row of talking about the wide receiver room as a question mark, but it's the question mark that we'll have to talk about as we go through summer camp and read tea leaves until we see how things play out in September.
Yeah, I mean, look, it has been. I mean, we've said this multiple times. It's been the question mark, but each year we have improved. Each year there has been incremental improvement. And I think that could be the case here. It's just that what we're banking on is, as you said, Brett, it's a lot of the elements that could take us to the next level are improvement. Like, we know what we're getting with the Faison. If Greathouse is healthy, that's a big question. If he's able to operate at a high level, then we largely know what we're getting from him. But these transfers from Ohio State, very highly touted, very talented, a lot of talent otherwise in that room. But it's not something that we can really bank on at this point. If it works out, which you would think you have enough talent in one room, some of that's going to rise up, but we don't know that that's going to happen until we actually see it. I also realize
one more question mark before we move on to Cooper Flanagan is going to be the starting tight end. He tore his Achilles in the Sugar Bowl a year ago. Kind of emerged, he was a really redshirt freshman then. And looked like he was possibly emerging to really push Eli Raridan, went down with an injury. Achilles is a tough injury. I think it's uncertain to see how he plays out. The only returning tight end that had any meaningful action last year is Ty Washington, who's really more of a blocking tight end, not very involved in the pass game. So again, all the potential in the world if Cooper Flanagan's healthy. There's some young true freshmen that are certainly talented from a recruiting perspective, but just hard to project the tight end group is going to be the Tyler Eifert, Kyle Rudolph. Could certainly grow into that, but a question mark going into at least the start of the season.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the tight end room because I neglected to mention Eli Raridan. Eli Raridan, look, had a good, solid season, which we were hopeful for this year. Not spectacular, but look, I think it's what we needed from the tight end position. And hopefully Flanagan this next season can kind of give us more of that traditional tight end where we get a tight end who's effective in the passing game and also effective as a blocker. I also realized I forgot to give my actual grade for the season. I agree with what you said, Brett. It's an A-. We were top 25, but right around that top 25 level with, I think us performing at a bit of a higher level at the end of the year. Now, moving on to the last position group on offense, that's the offensive line. And so for me, this was the biggest disappointment. This was a group that I thought had the potential to maybe not be the best position group on the team, but up there near the top, and certainly one that would be in that conversation. And so, in terms of Pro Football Focus grade, this group they ranked 66th in pass blocking, 45th in run blocking, 50 in line yards, 101st in stuff rate. So these are not great stats. I would say their poor performance in the Miami game is a huge reason that we lost. Even if the training wheels were off CJ Carr in that game and he was comfortable, that pass rush, I think that pass rush would have given us it would have limited our ability to even have much of a passing game, even if we were comfortable allowing Carr to pass the ball more. And look, it's to be fair that Miami pass rush gave everybody problems, but I think in that game there were multiple plays where we had offensive linemen who just straight up got embarrassed. So this was a group that was, I would say certainly not the Joe Moore finalist level squad that we were hoping for coming into this season. And granted, a lot of this was due to injuries. Jagasaw, he had that ATV accident over the summer. Probably our best offensive lineman when healthy. He didn't play at all this season. We had Billy Schrouth get hurt for chunks of the year. I mean, he still played a number of games, but he was not fully healthy for
missed the last 5 games of the year.
Exactly. Yeah. And then on top of that, Ashton Craig, who had really locked down that center spot and was playing at a high level before he got hurt. He went down and didn't play the rest of the season. So we had a number of players with less experience who had to fill in. Anthony Knapp got off to a little bit of a slow start, although I have to say by the end of the year, he was actually playing really well, which bodes really well for next season. But this was more of a patchwork offensive line, which was unfortunate because I do think if this group had stayed healthy, I think they had the potential to be an A, but because of these injuries, we performed more around a top 50 level. And for me, that gets me to a grade about a B. There's a case to be made for a B minus or a C plus, but I think just because of all these injuries and the fact that we saw certain players improve as the season went on, I mentioned Anthony Knapp. I think that's enough for me to keep them at that B and not ding them any further than that.
Interestingly, I'm surprised you went there. I had this, I was really debating B minus or C plus. I'll be a little more positive and say B minus. The reason for it, in our worst games, they were the Achilles heel against Miami. And they were the Achilles heel at Texas A&M in terms of the pass rush. Now, I get it. Against Miami, they were going up against an All-American in Bain and one of the best pass rushers in the country. But against the best competition, they really struggled. It really stood out in a way like our, kind of nickel corners did in that Miami game. I thought the offensive tackle position didn't grade out in the biggest moment. So I was kind of going to knock them down because of that. I'll look ahead to next year. Again, it's this group or wide receiver on offense or defense. This is the biggest question mark along with wide receiver in terms of who will play. So the case for this group to not improve is that the 2 highest graded offensive linemen were Billy Schrouth and Emil Wagner, and they are both gone to the NFL. So your 2 best linemen are gone. Okay. But Ashton Craig is back, and that's huge to get him back as a grad senior. Now, he has missed meaningful time each of the last 2 years, but with his injury and Billy Schrouth's injury, Sullivan Absher had 6+ starts this year, and Joe Otting started 9 games. So coming back next year, you have guys that have started at least 6 games in Anthony Knapp, Ashton Craig, Gerby Lambert, Sullivan Absher, and Joe Otting. You could make a starting 5 out of guys that are returning starters. That is golden in offensive line predictions. Like the number one thing that predicts offensive lines improving is when the whole squad is back. The other beauty that Notre Dame has is Charles Jagasaw coming back, who for the last 2 years has been hyped in the offseason as our best offensive lineman, had the ATV accident this year, tore his pec in summer camp in 2024, but came back and looked dominant in the college football playoff in 2024 when he stepped in for other injuries and just looked phenomenal against the nation's best competition. And so Jagasaw, we could be talking about having an All-American offensive lineman who's been in the program for a long time, who's done summer reps to earn a starting job, who's got playoff experience. And then on top of that, write this name down. I'm calling it right now. Notre Dame's next first-round pick on the offensive line is going to be Will Black. Top 50 recruit, fringe 5-star, an absolute beast, projected to be an NFL offensive tackle. Coming out of high school, he was 6'7", 305. He's put on height and weight since then. He's going to be a true sophomore redshirt freshman here this year. I expect he will push for a starting job. I expect, that starting line at some point next year is going to feature Will Black. And so you've got 5 returning starters, and maybe the 2 best offensive linemen in the program are Charles Jagasaw and Will Black, who we're not even talking about in terms of returning production because they didn't see meaningful snaps, really no snaps last year. That has the making to be most improved. Like if they're a B minus this year, it is highly uncertain because of just a lot of injuries this year and not sure who's starting. But those pieces put together just scream, this should be a top 5, top 10 offensive line in the country. So I'm not even saying they get back to the top 25 and they're in the A range. I'm squarely saying we should be talking about this as a top 10 offensive line next year with that continuity coming back and high upside in Jagasaw and Will Black.
Look, I think it's just there's too much talent, there's too much experience. The level of performance that we had in the 2025 season, the level of play was maybe not the worst case scenario for that position group, but it was about as bad. I was certainly at the low end of the range of what we thought was possible. So I think by virtue of that, assuming that we don't have a crazy sequence of injuries, knock on wood, I think that that we should see some meaningful improvement. And as you mentioned, Brett, there's a lot of high-end talent in this room. There's a lot to like. And if we get lucky and we don't really have any injuries, this could be a group that plays at a very high level and looks more like the offensive lines that we've come to expect from Notre Dame. All right.
Absolutely. And just to round out the offense, by the way, overall prediction going into next year with a preseason Heisman favorite at quarterback, you're returning your number 1 wide receiver from a year ago and your number 1 wide receiver from 2 years ago. All of that returning production on the offensive line and a talented running back room to go along with it. Expectation should be sky high. Expectation should be a top 5, top 10 offense, squarely knocking on the door of one of the best in the country. All of the ingredients are there for Mike Denbrock, returning coordinator. This should just be an electric offense. I cannot remember being this excited and this confident in an offense going into a season. I mean, truly, since like Jimmy Clausen was a returning starter, we're like, there's just no question marks. There's just like, we know who the quarterback is. He's our highly touted guy out of high school that we developed. We don't have to worry about is Brad Kelly going to play QB games. We don't have to worry about who's the transfer coming in or not coming in. Like, we just know what we have, and it should just be a top 5, top 10 offense. And I could not be more excited thinking ahead to watching this football team open up the season at Lambeau Field with the offense taking it. So I've got A+ projection for our offense for next year.
We've come a long way from the pine cone offense from 4 or 5 years ago or whatever that was. I remember getting Drew Pine he has a nice looking spiral. I remember getting excited about that, and then it's nice to have a Heisman Trophy, a true Heisman Trophy contender at the quarterback position. That really makes things a lot easier. All right, now moving on to the defense. So 2025 season ranked number 13 in SP+. So just by virtue of that puts them squarely in the A range. On Pro Football Focus grade, they were 5th in terms of havoc generated, 19th, 13th in success rate allowed. This was a defense that really struggled early on. We gave up a lot of points to Miami, to Texas A&M, but this was a side of the ball that improved tremendously. I remember as we were recording these podcasts week over week in the season. I remember a few weeks into the season, we were talking about how the defense was ranking near top like 50 in a lot of the advanced metrics just a few weeks in. And then by the end of the year, as I just mentioned, they ranked number 12. So this is a group that really surged and really improved as the year went on. And I think a lot of other advanced metrics that perhaps weighted recent performance maybe a little bit more would have had this defense ranking even higher. So while over the scope of the entire season, around top 10 feels about right, I think at the very end of the season, this was a defense that to me was performing at a top 5 level. I think if we got into the playoff, this was a defense that I would have said would have certainly been top 5, top 3. Now, they didn't get the chance to prove it, unfortunately, but I think that that's where they were headed. And look, a lot of that improvement came from the secondary. That was our, and we're going to get into that more in a little bit, but that was our big weakness on that side of the ball in our early games. And by the end, it was, I would say it was our greatest strength. And then look, our linebacker group, played extremely well too, and improved. And then the defensive line improved as well. But it was really that secondary that really the improvement in that secondary group is really what got the defense to have such a dramatic jump in their play. So, like I said, the SP Plus puts them squarely at an A. I would say an A seems fair. I think if we had a nice run in the playoff and they showed themselves to be more of like a top 5 defense, then they could have perhaps notched an A+ here, but they didn't get that opportunity. And because of some of those early performances, because those ding them a bit, I think an A seems like a very fair grade here.
Yeah, and that's what stinks about this team, I think, especially on defense, where we had a new defensive coordinator. Can't forget that just involved some uncertainty early on in the year, and had new pieces, especially at the nickel. We talked about throughout the season how Carson Hobbs got a lot of those reps early on, along with a couple other guys. And Devontae Smith was banged up. They split playing time. Carson Hobbs just didn't perform very well in those moments. Tay Johnson didn't emerge yet. So we were kind of splitting different guys at safety here before really Jalen Stroman, the other guy we were splitting with. Tay Johnson didn't lock that down. So when Tay Johnson, Devontae Smith were healthy, or even Dallas Golden supplanted Carson Hobbs in the secondary here for that backup nickel spot, that unit got so much better, but never had the opportunity to show it again against really a top 25 offense other than USC. And they shut down USC. And so it was a bummer they didn't get that look. In terms of looking ahead to next year, for offense, I intentionally gave the grade at the end because I think there's just more question marks, and you're going to see some different faces on the field at running back, to an extent, wide receiver and offensive line. Familiar names, but in different spots and different combinations. On defense, dear God, everyone is back. 13 of the 16 guys with the highest defensive snap count are returning, including the top 9. 9 guys are back on defense that led the team in snaps. 9 starters are back. The 2 other starters are going to be Bryce Young, who was 12th in snaps and arguably at different parts of the year was the starter opposite of Boubacar Traore. He actually ended the team number 2 in snaps among defensive ends, behind ahead of Jordan Botelho, ahead of Junior Tuihalamaka. So I'd actually argue we maybe even have 10 starters back. And then the 11th starter is going to be DJ McKinney, who is a 2-year starter at Colorado. And we're not talking about adding Pittsburgh's best defensive tackle in Francis Brew. We're not talking about adding Keon Keeley and Tion Gray, who were both rotational defensive linemen at Oregon and Alabama, top 20 defenses for both of those programs respectively. So this is going to be the easiest preview I've ever done. It's this year's squad with more certainty in who's the starters, in what the roles are, and the coordinator and the scheme we're running. and we improved the depth. Like across the board, if this is not a, like, again, expectation, things can happen. It's a weird sport, but like the expectation should be this is a top 5 defense. The expectation is this should be right where we were, but hit the ground running at the start of the year without, last year we had to replace so many guys like Ben Morrison and Riley Mills and Howard Cross and Jack Kaiser and Xavier Watts. Like, we talked about how much we believed in the talent coming back, but there was a lot of production to replace. This year, the squad's back together. So I've got this projected for an A+. I know we're going to go through the position groups, but I'm not even going to have much to say. It's just going to be the same team that was there, and I'll weigh in with some new faces we should expect to step up. So Mike, kick us off. How did the defensive line grade out?
The defensive line was good, right? It was not a spectacular unit. I guess similarly to how I talked about the wide receiver room, they were right around a top 25 level, in my opinion. I think one theme with this group is that what was holding them back was they were very productive. They they performed at a high level, but what held them back was like the lack of I would say these like spectacular plays, like a true star player. But the thing is, like with a lot of these impactful plays, they were like very close. So the big thing that held them back was just like their havoc rate. So 77th in havoc rate generated from the front seven, but their pressure rate was actually pretty high. So that's the thing. They were getting to the quarterback, they were impacting the quarterback, but they just weren't always landing that big final punch, right? And I would say that was the theme. This is like, while they were top 25, it felt like we were pretty close to having a jump to maybe top 15, top 10 from this group, but they didn't quite get there. They were getting a little bit better as the season went on. But otherwise, this was a group that played very fundamentally sound football. They were very clean. They were effective in run defense, 8th in Pro Football Focus grade run defense, 15th in tackling. Again, very clean, good fundamental tackling. And as I mentioned with the pressure rate, their pass rush was actually pretty effective. 19th in Pro Football Focus pass rush. It's just that these weren't always, they weren't able to always convert these into sacks, strip sacks, fumbles, things like that. That is a key element that you need for a position group to really hit that elite level. The success rate, not surprising. They performed very well when it came to success rate. 20th in success rate allowed on passing downs. 39th in line yards per rush. So they weren't allowing teams to generate a ton of push against them. Not amongst the top in the country, but still a strong metric. And when you take the grand scheme of all these things together, this is a unit that performed well. I mean, we had as we've tended to have from our defensive line units in the past, it was a very deep rotation of contributors. We had guys like Boubacar Traore, who you mentioned, who will be back. He was someone who had another jump in his play this year. Jason Onye, who we found out, which I'm sure you're going to talk about, Brett, shortly soon, got a waiver for 6th season of eligibility. So he's someone who played well this year. And I also have high hopes for him next year. We also had Josh Burnham, who's gone, unfortunately, but he played really well. Bryce Young, Gabriel Rubio. Gabriel Rubio was, I would argue, probably our best defensive lineman this year. Just a very effective player.
Only played 6 games, by the way. Sneaky stat that I think a lot of people forget.
Yeah.
Like, we played a lot of this football season without Rubio and hung in there pretty well.
We did. Elijah Hughes was an effective transfer for us. He played well. Botello as well. So look, this was, the theme here is I'm saying a lot of names. And it was a Heinisch. Heinisch was another one who, unfortunately, we're not going to have next year. But this was a deep rotation, and we had a lot of very productive players. Just no one person who's like a bona fide, like Ruben Bain impact type player. And I think that's what this unit would have needed to elevate from that A- range into more of an A or A+ range. But still, nothing to scoff at. This is a unit that, as I mentioned, played very productive football. Certainly didn't hold us back. Didn't hold back the defense. They definitely held their own, and they did. They would put our other position groups often in very good positions to make plays.
Yeah, I think this group, was, again, probably the weakest group on defense, but an A group, despite maybe not getting those sack stats. And Notre Dame now has a track record. We are going to do it with quality, quantity, a high number of high caliber players rotating in and out over a bona fide star. And Freeman is just committed that, hey, if we are rotating 10 guys, we will overwhelm your defensive line over time. And so you rattled off all of those guys. That's been our calling card now several years in a row. And it means we don't lose a beat when Riley Mills or Howard Cross goes down in the playoff. And next year is a little uncertain going into the transfer portal, but gosh, was this a good portal haul. And so on defense, you have coming back Boubacar Traore, Jason Onye, Bryce Young, Logan Thomas, Keon Keeley, hang on, I lost my list in here, and Elijah Hughes. And now adding to that, I mentioned Francis Brewu. He had more snaps for Pittsburgh's defensive line, a very solid top 30, top 35 defense. He was the anchor of that defense. He had more snaps than any other Notre Dame defensive lineman. He will be the most experienced player on that defensive line in terms of snaps played for a Power 4 football team. I get it. Pittsburgh's not Notre Dame, but he brings back a ton of experience. Keon Keeley, we mentioned this on the transfer show. He was actually a Notre Dame decommit, 5-star that went to Alabama with Saban and, never really broke through, but was very much a solid rotation player for him. He was one of Alabama's 8, 9, 10 guys in the rotation. And then a guy I'm really excited about, Tion Gray, was very much like one of the balanced defensive tackles, played over 200 snaps. Like he played about 20 snaps a game for Oregon. 6'6", 336 pounds. He is like a Vince Wilfork out there. Just very, very athletic. And we're not talking about incoming 5-star phenom Rodney Durham or redshirt freshman Chris Burgess, the highest defensive recruit in the 2025 class. So the last two recruiting classes, that'll be the freshman and sophomore class, the highest defensive recruit, really the highest recruit on either side of the ball in both classes, were defensive ends that'll also be on campus. So with that much returning production, I think the floor's just got to be improvement. The question is there a star in the making? And I think we sneaky forget Boubacar Traore had 10 sacks this year. Like he hit the 10 sack mark. And so Traore is that guy I've got circled to be an All-American caliber defensive end. But I could just as easily see it's Keon Keeley with his potential, or a Chris Burgess and Rodney Durham just off of their talent, or Bryce Young, everyone just keeps saying is just a physical specimen no one can block. And so, again, you see that much athleticism, and you just think there's a ton of upside for this defensive line to improve because the band is back together. And we added 3 proven producers from the portal at high-end programs. This isn't like adding a group of 5 guy. This is a contributor at Alabama, a contributor at Oregon, and the best player on Pittsburgh's defense. That feels like the makings of just a stud defensive line to anchor this side of the ball. Like, if you can't hear the excitement in my voice, I'm like jumping out of my chair, waiting to watch these guys just maul opposing offensive lines next year.
That defensive tackle position going into the transfer portal season was the biggest area of need for sure. And it was looking a little dicey for a minute, but credit to the staff. I mean, they really came through, and I would say they hit a home run here, about as good as you could have hoped for in terms of a transfer portal haul. And I mentioned Onye getting that waiver is big as well, because he's someone who's been continuing to improve. And I think lapping another full season after this past one, after he had taken that season off, I think that we could see a jump from play in him as well. Yeah, this group is definitely one to watch. As I said, I had him at like an A-, kind of top 25-ish. But as I also mentioned, they felt like they were close many, many times to making that jump. They just needed more impactful plays. I'm with you, Brett. I think the floor is very high for this group. I think the floor is about how they played last year. But I think it's more likely that we get that jump. We get that elite, pass rusher off the edge. We just get more impactful play. in the middle from the defensive tackle position. So I'm optimistic. I think this group has. I'm with you. I think they have the potential to jump to certainly an A. I know you had them as an A, but I think for my grade, I'm optimistic that they could jump to an A. Maybe an A plus would be like a blue sky scenario for sure. But I think certainly elevating their play up a notch seems fair. Moving on to the linebacker group. This was just a group that was very consistently good all year. It was a core group of Bowen, Snead, Osbury. KVA emerged at the end of the season. Unfortunately, he got hurt in I think it was the Syracuse game. Was it the Syracuse game or the
Syracuse game? Tore his ACL. So that's preview. Right. It's just, when it's late in the season like that, it's unclear. He very easily could be on the front end of that, recover in 6 months, be ready to go to play. Some of those ACL injuries, I'm not banking on him in our preview for next year. I'll put it that way, just because those ACL injuries can just take time.
Which is a shame because he really was emerging this year. I remember
insane. He was turning into our best linebacker. Yeah.
He was. Yeah, there was like a 3-4 game stretch where each week we'd say who's our highest graded player on defense, and it was KVA, and he would have like a grade of like 85 or higher, which is phenomenal, and just all over the field, big time stops, big time havoc plays. So look, hopefully he'll be ahead on the recovery, but someone who, even though he got injured, still played meaningful football for us and made a big impact. And this group as a whole, played extremely well for us. I think they're worthy of an A here. I think it's one of the better linebacker groups in the entire country. They're effective against the run, 8th in Pro Football Focus grade for run defense. Similar to the front seven, they were also very clean in terms of tackling, ranked 15th in tackling. In terms of havoc, this is in an area, this is for the whole front seven. The front seven was 77th in havoc generated. I feel like more of that is on that defensive line group than the linebackers, but certainly, they get dinged for that a little bit here. But overall, this was a strength of the defense. They also performed very well in terms of open field yards, 3rd in open field yards per play. So they really weren't allowing the other team's playmakers to juke them out or get a bunch of extra yards, which is, I think, it's a pretty good metric in terms of telling you how good at tackling they are, and how clean they are in terms of preventing big plays. So, one of our better position groups on the team, and Brett, as you'll talk about in a minute, like pretty much the whole band is coming back. So the potential here is also sky high for this group as well.
That's all I got. Bowen, Snead, Osbury, the 3 biggest contributors this year are all back. Kingston Viliamuasa, question mark. Again, I actually just looked it up right now. Freeman gave a end of season report saying surgery is successful, recovery is going well, and expect him to be available week 1. That's only more upside to this room. And then one name that didn't play a ton, but keep an eye out for Madden Faraimo. Highly touted guy, started playing. I just think he's going to have a hard time breaking through this group, but just an absolute stud. He was a top 100 recruit. He was a true freshman last year and broke into the rotation, just to say that out loud. Like, he was a freshman and broke into a rotation that consisted of 3 upperclassmen, multi-year starters, and Kingston Viliamuasa, who was trending towards being the best linebacker of that group. So you have 4 absolute studs, and Madden Faraimo was doing so well that he was just demanding getting playing time. And again, some of that in mop-up duty for sure, but there were games where he was getting 25, 30 snaps in late in the season, certainly after Kingston went down, but even before KVA went down. Madden was getting a lot of looks. Again, true freshman last year, coming in as a sophomore. I would not be surprised if he starts knocking on the door and that's a name we start hearing about. And a little bit like the defensive line, I think one of the problems for Notre Dame, this isn't even a problem, but to get accolades, to get some of these guys the attention to be an All-American, is hard because we're going to rotate 5 linebackers next year, which in our 4-2-5 scheme, there's really only 2 of those guys on the field and most down. Some situations we'll have 3, but most we only have 2 of them on the field. So they just got to split a lot of reps, and Drake Bowen ain't coming off the field. So like there's just not as many snaps to go around when you have 5 super talented linebackers, but they're all coming back, and it's just such a high floor and high ceiling. It's an A plus expectation for the linebackers next year, continuing a consistent theme. All right, Mike, round us out, bring us home. The secondary, the best in the unit in the country, the best secondary 2 years ago. Where did they grade out last year?
At the end of the year, they were performing at a level where you could argue that they were the best secondary in the country. However, the first couple games in the season, I think they were grading out more like a D. Honestly, this was a unit that was really struggling the first couple games, particularly against Miami and Texas A&M. But the fact that I'm going to give them an A tells you how dramatic that improvement was over the course of the season. So, look, I think this is a unit that once they figured it out, once they really firmed up their rotation and they got comfortable with Chris Ash's scheme, they were performing as well as anyone in the country. So 5th in coverage, 3rd in havoc rate generated from the secondary, 3rd in open field yards per play. So just all these metrics I'm mentioning here, it's among the top in the country, and that's even with these very poor performances in the first couple games. 24th in success rate allowed on passing downs. And look, I think it's just if I just rattle off the names of the people in this unit, it would strike fear in me if I were an opposing quarterback. You have the best cornerback in the country, Leonard Moore. You have Christian Gray alongside him, who is not, I would say, certainly not an elite cornerback, but he is a good cornerback. And my opinion with him is that he has always been that he does very well unless he's going up against a truly elite wide receiver. He does pretty well against 95% of the wide receivers in college football. In the safety, at the safety position, Adon Schuler, very strong 2024 season. And he lapped that with another very strong performance in 2025, really showed himself as a leader in the secondary, showed himself as an impact player. The other safety spot, which was up for grabs this season, that was a spot that we were curious how we were going to handle that. Well, fortunately, it looks like we found a future star in that role, and that's Tay Johnson. Tay Johnson, over the course of the year, improved tremendously. By the end of the year, he was a true impact player back there. So I think you start with those 4 guys right there, and that's about as good of a secondary as I think you'll find across. I would put those 4 guys against any secondary in the country, honestly. And then look, on top of that, I think the one issue for the team this season early on in particular was that nickel spot. And it's not that we didn't have an effective player at that spot. It's just that Devontae Smith, who was our presumed nickel, was just hurt early on. But once he was healthy, that's when I would say that's when this unit really started to take off. So when this unit was healthy and they had gotten comfortable with Chris Ash, I think they were performing at an A+ level. Before Devontae Smith was healthy and they had a few things that they were figuring out, they were actually more at a D. But because that performance was so strong later on in the season, and that improvement was so significant, it still gets them an A. And look, this is a theme that we keep mentioning. If they had the opportunity to play in the college football playoff, I think there's a chance here that we could have notched them up to an A+. Because if they were just completely shutting down top quarterbacks in the playoff, look, I think that's gonna trump anything that happened in those first couple games of the season. So, but again, they didn't get that opportunity, as we keep saying. So I think that because of that, they have to stay at an A.
So clearly, expectation next year's A+. Leonard Moore, Christian Gray, Adon Schuler, Tay Johnson are all back. And we continue the theme of graduate transfers coming in to play nickel. We had Thomas Harper in 2023, Jordan Clark in 2024. Last year, obviously, Devontae Smith. 3 for 3. All three of those guys panned out. This year, it's going to be DJ McKinney from Colorado. Full expectation he continues that productivity. And there's a couple of reasons why you could be concerned or believe there's even more upside. The one obvious reason for concern is Mike Mickens is off to the NFL to be the defensive backs coach for the Baltimore Ravens. That stinks. Okay, so we lose the best secondary coach in the country. But last year, again, Devontae Smith was hurt for big parts of the Miami and A&M games. And so you're rotating in Carson Hobbs. You're rotating in, do I go to Carson Hobbs or true freshman? And I hate to keep harping on Hobbs. He's actually transferred and left the program. I wish him best of luck, but it just didn't work out at ND and wasn't productive on the field. Graded out just he just kept getting beaten those two big games. This year, we know the depth is there in Dallas Golden and Mark Zachary backing up both the nickel and outside corner spot. So we know that depth is there. We know we have a Luke Talich behind Adon Schuler and Tate Johnson. So even that second group here is proven productivity that I think erases a lot of that uncertainty. And we're not replacing Xavier Watts. We're not replacing both safety positions. And so I think that is the biggest difference here, actually, and the nickel. So sure, we were bringing back Gray and Moore, but we were replacing the three other spots in the secondary. This year, the only new face will be DJ McKinney. Jaden Sanders will be in the two deep, but really only one new starter. And we know all of the pieces around them that I think it's just so much more continuity going into the start of the year that, again, the expectation just has to be this is a top 5, top 10 secondary. And it's, as we wrap up this part of the roster, the one observation that I have taken as a whole, there's so much riding on this season. Notre Dame is the preseason favorite to win the title, tied with Ohio State. That it gives me some Penn State vibes. Penn State went all in last year, had the coach, had the quarterback in Drew Aller, had both running backs in Katron Allen and Singleton back, had all of the defensive players and pieces back, and didn't live up to expectations. Now, I think they maybe missed how much did they lose in Warren and Abdul Carter. I'd argue that they're their best offensive player and their best defensive player. But when there's so much pressure to win now in college football with 18, 19, 20-year-old kids that aren't NFL players, that aren't all built for that win now mentality that I think exists so clearly in the NFL, and you just have more experienced men dealing with it, I get a little nervous. Like, I almost want to tone back the hype of this show. But if you just look at what's coming back, you just have to say we've got a top 5 team and they should be contending for a title. Don't know if they'll win it. Don't know if they'll be there at the end of the year. I think every game in these playoffs, in the semifinals and quarterfinals, are more often than not going to be coin flips. And that's why I love the 12-team playoff format. I think it's brought so much parity to the sport and it's brought so much competition. But I get a little nervous about the pressure of the hype on this team because on paper, they're the favorite. And, we haven't been in that situation before. That is new pressure that Notre Dame has not experienced in 33 years. Has there been this much, like, we are the favorites title expectations? How is Freeman and the program going to handle that? I hope the committee snubbing us gives us the chip on our shoulder that overcomes anyone looking ahead, that overcomes kind of the noise of being the favorites. But that's something to keep an eye on. Certainly was a big storyline for Penn State this year.
Yeah, I would contend being a title favorite, and not even just the favorite, just say you're in that top 5. I think that tends to be a pretty good barometer for your odds of actually, being there at the end. Maybe you don't win, but I think it's exactly what you need to see typically to have some confidence that you have a team that could actually win a title. And of course, there are exceptions, especially now in this current day and age with the transfer portal. Although, look, IU coming into this season, expectations were that IU was also going to be a very good team as well. Now they exceeded those expectations, but it wasn't like they just, popped out of the top, outside of the top 25 and became the number one team in the country. But this is where you want to be. These are the types of things that you see when you have a top of the line coach who's attracting NFL interest, who's built a staff that is at the end of the season consistently getting, when they leave, it's because they're getting poached by NFL teams, right? When you've built a roster that is just loaded at every position, that has a lot of NFL potential. These are the types of things that you would see if you rewind the clock 5-6 years ago from Georgia, Alabama, or even more recently, Ohio State. Doesn't mean that you're going to win the title, but it means you're positioned to have a real shot at it. And look, we don't know exactly, as you mentioned, Brett, you gave a lot of reasons that we don't really know how they're going to handle this pressure. We've seen many great teams in many sports have tremendous pressure, to win a title. Teams that in many cases probably were actually the best team, but they weren't able to do it. So that is a big question mark. But we do have Marcus Freeman, and I think he's one of the best coaches in the country. I think there's a shot that in a few years we might be saying he is the best coach in the country. The one area that has dinged him in the past has been sometimes these lapses early season. So that's the one thing we got to fix. Fortunately, the schedule this year, I think, shapes up to where we give ourselves a little bit more breathing room. And I think we're beyond, the Marshalls and the NIU, the NIU games of the past. I think this is a team that is just so talented that that something like that is just exceedingly unlikely. Now, look, I don't want to jinx us, but I think that we've evolved to a point to where that we're beyond that. I don't have any concerns about Marcus Freeman's ability to have a team that continues to improve as the season goes on. It's just some of these early trip ups, but I think the schedule is positioned well to kind of mitigate that risk. And I think he's also learned a lot from those experiences to where it's less, like I said, I think it's less like it's going to happen. Freeman is someone who's constantly improving. I made this observation. This is a bit of a tangent about Brian Kelly in the past. There's one thing that I did like about him is that he tended to, it's like each year I would notice he would make little improvements to try to keep things moving. I feel like that's true for Marcus Freeman, but like in an even more exaggerated sense. I feel like we're seeing like leaps from him every year, right? There was a concern about him earlier in his head coaching career about, his ability to outfox schematically other top head coaches. And then he answered that in the college football playoff, against Kirby Smart and some of these other teams and some of these really savvy plays that we do, some of these trick plays that we do. It seems like we're really ahead on these things. That was a big question about him. And he's shown himself to be about as good as possible with that. And then, early on we were kind of wondering about how effective he would be in terms of his acumen for hiring talent. Because there's the whole, the whole Jared Parker situation. And, since then, like it's really I would say he has really knocked it out of the park. He's brought in extremely top of the line coaching talent. And like I said, it's talent that at the end of the season, you have to be worried that they might get an offer from the NFL. So I think that it's just, anytime there's been a question, he has eventually gotten to the point to where he has answered it, tenfold. And so I think these early season blemishes are going to be past us. I think this is the year where we take the step to the next level. I think if there's a time to lean in, this is the time to lean in. Of course, you could get burned, but if you're not getting fired up for a Notre Dame team that has the best Vegas odds, then I don't know what else is going to get you fired up. And look, you got to take these Vegas odds with a grain of salt. When I was looking at the college football playoff selection, so it said Notre Dame was like a 97% lock. So it's not like you can just assume these things are truth, but it is, like I said, it's a barometer. It's a good sense check on where you stand. And I think where we stand is that this is our best this is our best chance at winning a title in decades, over 30 years for sure.
Let's close out our look ahead to next year by looking at the schedule. And honestly, this is one of those situations where Notre Dame as an independent can have some gauntlets and some years where the schedule is just really weak. And it's hard because when you play in a conference and so you're playing the same group of teams and you know who they're going to be, but they all play each other. So it's like, well, some of the teams are going to be the returning best team from last year, and some of them are going to be like, you're going to play up and down a standings that will balance your schedule for you because you're all playing each other. When you're independent, you can have years where you wind up playing everyone who's great and years where you wind up playing everyone who's poorly. This year, 8 of our 12 opponents finished with a record of 4-8 or worse. And so Notre Dame, I think, is already getting knocked in the media for a weak schedule. Now, that's being offset by 4 teams that finished 8-4 or better in Navy, SMU, BYU, and Miami. I don't want to spend time on the 8 teams that had 8 or more losses. I don't think any of those teams really are in a position to make a giant step next year. And Notre Dame should be multiple touchdown favorites in those 8 games. Notre Dame has 4 marquee matchups, and really I'd argue 2 in Miami and BYU. And this is a situation where Notre Dame's schedule is not deep enough to go 10-2. There's not even like a case to be made that 10-2 works unless if something really unfolds in the quality of opponent we're not expecting. Navy, even if they're winning 8+ games a year, as Notre Dame's just seen, over the last several years, just outclasses the midshipmen. So I'm focused on SMU, BYU, and Miami. And Mike, I'll just cover SMU in a minute. Do not look past SMU, Notre Dame fans. Kevin Jennings is returning to be a third-year starter, led this team to the college football playoff 2 years ago, beat Miami this year, and I think is going to be if not the ACC preseason MVP, I'm putting my $100 on Kevin Jennings being the best player in the ACC, and a lot of talent around him. So SMU projects to be a top 25 opponent, but I think it's hard to sit and say SMU is going to be a tougher matchup than BYU or Miami. Mike, I'll let you go first, and I'm ready to argue either side of this one. What matchup scares you more, Miami or BYU?
I think it's gotta be Miami, right? Like obviously they're gonna have questions. A couple of their headline players are moving on. Carson Beck, Ruben Bain, those are the most notable. These were, these were their top of the line impact players, right? But we had even more questions about them coming into the season this past year, and they pretty much answered all those questions with flying colors. So I think Miami has certainly established themselves. I think at this point, as a program, even if they have to rely on the transfer portal a bit, that you should expect them to to at least be a top 15. I would say they're probably I would imagine they're probably at least a top 10 team this year. I mean, I think notably they got the Duke quarterback, Darian Mensah. That's an impact quarterback for them. So I would imagine that their offense is again going to be among one of the top in the country. We know they have great receivers. Tony's not going anywhere. He's going to be there for a couple more years. So I think this is still a very, very dangerous Miami team. But I think when we face them, I think it's not going to be game one where we have a quarterback with training wheels on and, our secondary hasn't quite figured out what they're doing. We'll be playing them at full strength. And I like our chances against them at full strength. And we also have them at home. So look, I am optimistic in our game against them, but I would say, in my opinion, they are the team that scares me the most. I think that they're likely to be the most talented team that we face, and they have more upside than anyone else on the schedule. All
right. I'm so glad you took Miami because I thought you were going to take Miami. So I've been prepping here for a big BYU defense.
This is an ambush.
Now let me start. If I previewed the other side too. So I agree with everything you said. The reasons why Miami is Malachi Tony and Mark Fletcher Jr., their two best skill position players, are back. And you mentioned Darian Mensah. Interestingly, he's only played 2 years of college football. Do you know where he played before Duke?
I'm going to let you tell me.
Tulane. And he crushed it at Tulane.
Yeah, that's right.
So at Tulane, he threw for 2,700 yards, 22 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions, a near identical stat line as CJ Carr in his first year as a starter. And then at Duke, threw for almost 4,000 yards, 34 touchdowns, and just 6 interceptions. And that was, other than Darian Mensah, that was not a good Duke team. So he's already proven, hey, I can be a first time on the roster, first time on campus, learn the playbook in 6 months, show up and be really productive. He's done it twice. I expect him to hit the ground running in Miami and be really, really good. Like he just has all of the makings to be a dangerous player. 6'3", 205, has the build. Like he seems like the real deal. And really, like, other than the fact, like, I mean, Duke just didn't play anybody, but like, he lit up Clemson, he lit up Georgia Tech, like they just lit up. He lit up Tulane, his old team, who was also knocking on the door of the college football playoff this year. He lit up Virginia and won them the conference championship game. Like, Darian Mensah is great. Okay, so that's the argument. Let me now take the other side. They are losing their 4 best offensive linemen. They're saying they're bringing back 2 starters, but it's the guy that couldn't keep the job who lost the other guard spot to the other guy, so they kept rotating all year. So their 5th and 6th best offensive linemen are the only 2 back. They lose Ruben Bain, who is just an absolute force, and all-American defensive ends that can generate pressure and get sacks when they're always double-teamed is just a nightmare. Like, there's just no way to scheme around that when you're an offensive coordinator. And so one of my concerns, if I'm a Miami fan, this is pro Notre Dame, is without Ruben Bain, I don't know if the rest of that defensive line was that good or if they just benefited from all of the attention Ruben Bain got. I think that's what happened to Penn State. Abdul Carter was phenomenal, goes off to the NFL, and it's like, actually, maybe the rest of that Penn State defensive line wasn't that good once Carter wasn't there. So I'm fading hard the trenches for Miami. The game is in South Bend in November, and I love it when Southern California and Southern Florida boys show up to play football in South Bend and have to deal with the cold weather. So I get all of the reason to be pro Miami and what Mario Cristobal is doing there, but I think there's some big reasons to believe that program should take a step back, and they get Notre Dame on the road, and our environment is going to be so effing fired up. Why BYU? They bring back a ton. Bear Bachmeier, first off, his name is Bear Bachmeier, is their QB. He's back, Big 12, one of the best quarterbacks in the Big 12. Interestingly, he's officially listed at 6'2", 230. I think he's more like 250, like a big guy, bringing back a ton of productivity. We play that game on the road in Utah at altitude. I just think this is a top 15 program. They have a chip on their shoulder. They have been the first team out or second team out of the 12-team college football playoff 2 years in a row. And they are now bringing back here a ton of continuity, and we play them on the road. Like, that's really, really tough. So Notre Dame, once again, is going to have 2 top 10, top 15 matchups, one at home, one on the road, just like this year. And if we go 0-2 again, we do not have the luxury in the rest of our schedule to make an argument to get in. We have to split these games. If we go 1-1, I think we are squarely in and hosting. If we go 2-0, I think we're the number 1 team in the country. And it's going to come down to another 2-game season. If you want to talk to me in the offseason about why this keeps making me think, hey, if your entire year comes down to 2 games and you have no room for error, consider joining a conference. I'll park that argument for another day. But the difference here is they are not start of the season with a freshman or with a first-time starting quarterback, a first-time defensive coordinator, and turning over a bunch of talent on defense. This is going to be in mid-October and early November, well spaced out. We should be favorites in both games. The tougher of the 2 games is at home, and there's way, way more certainty in our program. I feel way better going into those games. And so, Mike, I'm going to dive right into my prediction. If people cannot tell how stoked I am about 2026 football for the Irish, I have Notre Dame going not 12-0. I have Notre Dame going 15-0, winning our first title since 1988. Build Freeman a statue in spring 2027. I've got Notre Dame winning it all. And the stats back it up. If this is not the year to put your heart and your mind and hopefully your wallet, I don't know, go donate some NIL funds to Freeman. Like, this is the year to go all in as Notre Dame fans. Expectations should be sky high. I've got us beating both the Cougars, Hurricanes, everyone else on that schedule. Raise the banner. Calling the prediction right now on February 1st.
I tend to temper my expectations a little bit, I think, relative to you. Like, if you go 12-0, I tend to go 11-1. But
or if I go 6-6,
I'll go. Yeah,
you temper them the other way. Fair. That's fair.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. But Brett, for all the reasons that you just mentioned, and for all the reasons that I was talking about, maybe like 10 or 15 minutes ago, I'm with you. I think this is the year to go all in. This is the year where we leave no doubt to say a Marcus Freeman quote. So I'm with you. I think we go undefeated. I think we get a first round bye, and I think we finally end this damn title drought. And it'll be a incredible moment. And it'll be a really bad day for the haters, just as importantly, right? The list of things that they can say about Notre Dame just completely evaporated. But I'm picturing Marcus Freeman getting hoisted up by his players, put a statue outside the stadium. And I mean, look, it's something that 10 years ago, or even 5, honestly, even like 5 years ago, didn't really feel like a realistic possibility. It felt like we would have had to hit like a 6-way parlay, right? We'd have to get a generational quarterback, and maybe it'd be like a weak year for the Bamas and the Clemsons and the LSUs and the Ohio States of the world. But now it feels like we're squarely in that top tier. We're as I was talking about before, we're at that level to where we can actually bring it home because we're just straight up one of the best teams in the country, maybe even the best team in the country. So that's something new. And that's again, that's a testament to what Marcus Freeman has built. And I think this team is really hungry. They're experienced. They're very, very talented. And I think they really want to, I think they're just going to want to like rip through the season, inflict as much pain as possible, leave no doubt. And then when you get to the playoff, we're going to see that savvy Marcus Freeman that we saw in that playoff run the prior season. I think we'll see that. And then, hopefully he'll stick around and we can win more titles. But if he decided to go to
one, let's not get greedy. Let's start with one.
And then if he wants to go to the NFL, sure. Right. Sure. That's fine. So yeah, I'm matching your optimism here. I need to get to Vegas soon so I can, put down a bet on Notre Dame winning the national title.
Exactly. Well, that is our last show for season 5. Thank you to all of our listeners. A roller coaster year for sure. But truly, when you step back and reflect on the state of the program, what a great place to be. Until we talk again, likely this summer, unless if there's any big off-season news. How are we going to sound? I got it. I know how we're going to sign off here going into the season. Gyrish beat committees.
Gyrish beat committees.